Russia has more than its share of problems on the Ukrainian battlefield. Over 1 million of the country's soldiers have been killed or injured, along with tens of thousands of units of military equipment being destroyed. However, it may end up not being what Ukraine achieves inside Ukraine that ends Vladimir Putin's war. It could be a problem inside Russia. A seemingly incurable disease that's afflicted Russia since the Soviet era is now on the verge of wrecking the country. Russia has a Dutch disease, and it's rotting the country from within. That's according to Paul Warburg, who posted a YouTube video on October 10, detailing how Russia's version of the Dutch disease is multi-layered and may be one of the worst cases ever seen. But before digging into Warburg's points, perhaps a little context is needed. It's important to understand what the Dutch disease is before being able to see how Russia is afflicted with what may be a country-ending dose of that disease. As the name implies, the Dutch disease is named after a very specific incident that occurred in the Netherlands from the late 1950s. It all started when the Dutch discovered natural gas deposits in the North Sea in 1959. Naturally, the Dutch started extracting and selling this gas, leading to a ton of new wealth that also led to the value of Netherlands currency rising sharply. That all sounds great until the downside becomes clear. A single product having this much of an effect on a country isn't great for the other products that the country sells. As the Netherlands enjoyed the newfound wealth being generated by its energy industry, other business sectors inside the country started to collapse. The Dutch guilder, getting so much stronger, had the unintended side effect of weakening Dutch exports of non-energy products. Unemployment skyrocketed from 1.1% to 5.1% as businesses outside the energy sector were forced to close their doors for several reasons. Those companies couldn't make as much money as they needed to make, and they were also dealing with a surging industry that could offer better wages to their potential employees. Everybody wanted to work in Dutch oil and gas, and other Dutch industries started collapsing as a result. This situation illustrates what happens when a nation places all of its eggs into a single sector's basket. Nobody can blame the Netherlands for trying to make as much money as it could from its newfound gas and oil deposits. Any other nation would do the same thing. However, the sheer pace of the surge of the country's energy industry shattered everything around it. That's the Dutch disease in a nutshell. And right now, Russia has a terrible case of this disease that could cause its economy to collapse long before Ukraine can physically expel Russia's invaders from its territory. And that leads back to Warburg's video, which he opens by highlighting the size of the catastrophe that looms large in Russia's future.
But when you look at the Russian economy right now, they are actually afflicted with this very specific economic disease, not just at one level, but on multiple different levels that gets worse the deeper you look.
And, just as with the Dutch, it all starts with Russia's energy industry. Highlighted by Warburg as the most significant symptom of Russia's Dutch disease, Russia's energy industry is on its knees right now. That's especially the case for its gasoline and refined oil sectors, which have been under constant Ukrainian bombardment for the last couple of months. On October 14 alone, the Kyiv Independent reported that Russia has asked its federal Antimonopoly Service to impose maximum prices at gas stations across the country. That's happening because there are major shortages that are creating supply and demand issues. With gas stations receiving so little of the gasoline that they sell, some are raising their prices to take advantage of the demand for a product that is now in very limited supply. Russia is trying to force the prices back down through legislation, but that doesn't change the fact that many of its gas stations simply don't have enough of the product that they need to sell. Many of Russia's gas stations have stopped selling altogether. In the country's southern federal district alone, 220 gas stations, which amount to 14% of the district's total, have suspended fuel sales entirely. Russia, of course, claims that this is a temporary problem. On October 13, Russia's finance minister, Anton Siluanov, tried to claim that Russia has this problem under control. Regarding the specific issue of fuel prices in certain regions, it's clear that there are currently some supply constraints, which, I'm confident, will be overcome in the near future. Reuters reports Siluanov as claiming. He's wrong. The supply constraints he mentions are being caused by Ukraine's long-range drone strikes, and those strikes aren't just going to stop because Russia hopes that they will.
And this is a direct result of Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, in particular Russian oil refineries, which are not letting up, they are only increasing with each passing day.
As Warburg points out, that's not what Russia wants to hear, As the BBC reported on October 2nd, Ukraine has hit 21 of Russia's 38 large refineries already in 2025, with several of them being hit multiple times. That's a 48% increase over 2024's refinery strike figures, and there's no reason for Ukraine to stop now. It can see the impact its attacks are having not just in the queues that are now forming at Russia's gas stations, but in the desperate measures Russia is taking to overcome its fuel crisis. For instance, Russia is turning to other countries to get its hands on gasoline. On October 1st, the Kyiv Independent reported that Russia is now turning to Asia to maintain its domestic supplies of gasoline after Ukraine's refinery strike shut down almost 40% of the country's refining capacity. China appears to be among those countries, and that issue will be explored shortly, as is Belarus. It's here where the first symptom of Russia's Dutch disease really starts to rear its head. Russia shouldn't have to buy gasoline. Oil and gas are the country's two most powerful economic drivers. Now that it doesn't have gasoline to sell, Russia is dealing with a massive hit. As Warburg notes,
Russia's energy exports make up the majority of income within the entire country. Even those incomes that don't come directly from energy exports often come indirectly from energy exports.
In other words, businesses that support Russia's energy industry, like the gasoline stations already mentioned, will struggle whenever Russia's overall energy sector is hurting. That's the Dutch disease Russia suffers from, at least on the surface level. It goes much deeper, but before explaining how, it's worth exploring a painful little irony that Russia is dealing with right now. China is one of the countries from which Russia is going to be buying refined oil products to make up for the shortfall it's currently experiencing. China, of course, has been one of Russia's main customers for crude oil since the Ukraine war began. China bought more than 100 million tons of Russian crude in 2024 alone, taking advantage of cut price rates along the way. Warburg notes that Russia's oil sales to China were likely barely profitable due to China having Russia over a barrel as one of its few remaining major customers. The irony is that the crude oil China has bought so much of is now being sold back to Russia in the form of refined products that carry higher prices than crude. Russia thought that China was helping to support it financially in a war with Ukraine. The reality is that China is more than happy to exploit Russia's weakened position, which makes the Dutch disease afflicting Russia all the more debilitating. Geopolitically, China has played Russia like a fiddle, as the Jamestown Foundation highlighted as far back as December 2023. Russia is being increasingly forced to supply strategic resources to partners on highly unfavorable terms in exchange for minor displays of political support and assistance, the foundation said almost 2 years ago. Not a lot has changed, outside of China taking its exploitation of Russia's vulnerability further by using its refined oil products to earn back some of the money Putin had hoped that he could dedicate to the Ukraine war. Now, Russia's struggling gasoline industry was mentioned as the major symptom of its Dutch disease. Others run much deeper, as becomes clear from Warburg's offhand comment about how even industries that support Russia's energy sector are dependent on the success of that sector. The same goes for almost every other industry in Russia, for the simple reason that Russia is a massive country. It's here where the genius of Ukraine's refinery striking strategy really comes into play. Warburg notes that Russia's refineries are spread all over the country, so Ukraine has responded by hitting as many as it can, as deep as its weapons will allow it to strike. There's a very good reason that Russia's refineries are spread out as they are. As Warburg reveals,
the reason that refineries are geographically distributed all across the country is to lower last-mile transport costs, so that refined energy doesn't have to travel as far.
Think about what that means for Russia right now. The refineries that it still has operating at a decent capacity are those that are out of reach of Ukraine's long-range drones. That also means those refineries are a long way away from the Russian regions that need more gasoline. Russia is now being forced to transport refined oil products further, using those very products to fuel the trucks and trains engaging in these longer journeys. The same goes for the refined oil that Russia is importing, by the way. Russia only has so many ports into which those products can arrive. The gasoline Russia is buying all needs to be transported over large distances to get to where it needs to go. That's a second layer of cost. And it sees Russia's Dutch disease doubling down on itself. The only cure Russia has come up with for its oil dependence is a solution that only makes that dependence larger. Russia's economy could functionally seize up as a result of this problem, Warburg says.
Both because of the lost revenues and the increased costs, but also for the simple fact that if people can't use energy, they can't buy, sell, or trade with each other.
Pravda says that over half of Russia's regions have been hit by gasoline shortages as of October 12. In several of those regions, Russian consumers are being limited to buying as little as 10 to 20 litres of gasoline per visit to a gas station, assuming they can buy any gasoline at all. That amounts to 4.39 gallons at best, which is nowhere near enough to fill the tanks of most cars. For Russian business owners who rely on travel around the country to keep their companies running, whether their own travel or that of their employees, conditions are dire. Cars can barely fill up enough to reach the limits of their own regions, never mind traveling into other areas of Russia. As mentioned earlier, the Dutch disease affects businesses outside of the one in which a country enriches itself. In the Netherlands case, a skyrocketing currency negatively impacted other sectors. For Russia, the loss of its most important products is causing issues because Russia can't keep up with its domestic companies' gasoline demands. And Russia can't do much to solve this Dutch disease problem either. After all, it's a problem that's existed for decades, and it's one that cannot be solved within the system of government under which Russia operates. Warburg makes this point, noting that the original carriers of the Dutch disease managed to recover because the Netherlands is a democratic nation. Russia, on the other hand, is an oligarchy.
In a democratic country, the Netherlands had incentives to fix the problem, while in an oligarchy, a dictatorship, the people at the top had incentives to not care about the rest of the economy, but rather to lean into what made them personally more profitable.
Russia's economic woes throughout the Ukraine war are well known, but its oligarchs aren't struggling. In August, Newsweek reported that Russia's richest billionaires are all getting wealthier very quickly. Over the last year alone, those oligarchs have added $20 billion to their collective wealth. It's a sort of short-sighted greed that is sure to be fed further now that Russia has so many problems with its main product. Again, supply and demand come into play. Russia's surviving oil refiners can now command more money for their products domestically because of the shortages Russia is experiencing. That's already evident. As France 24 reports, AI-92 and AI-95 gasoline are now trading at $900 and $1,000 per ton, respectively, which puts both close to their all-time highs. Russia's oligarchs are cashing in, and Putin is almost certainly among them, as the rest of Russia struggles. There is no incentive in Russia to fix this problem. The oligarchs won't allow it. Other industries are struggling as a result, as the Moscow Times highlighted in August. The previous July saw Russia's manufacturing sector shrink at its fastest rate since March 2022, the outlet says. The sector's Purchasing Managers Index dropped to 47 in July, down from 47.5 in June. Any number below 50 is a signal of a sector in decline, and this is exactly the sort of problem that the Dutch disease causes. Other sectors weaken as Russia plows its collective energy and money into the one sector that generates the most wealth. And if there's any doubt that energy is that wealth maker for Russia, consider the figures offered by the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. It says that revenue from Russia's oil and gas industry accounts for between 30 and 50% of Russia's total federal budget in any given year, in addition to accounting for about 20% of Russia's gross domestic product. Putin doesn't want to change that. Russia actively strangles any innovators across all fields because control is more important than growth to Putin. Back in June, the Moscow Times reported that Putin claims that we need to strangle them, in reference to Western tech giants that might intend to invest in Russia. Those tech giants would provide opportunities for Russians outside of the oligarchy bubble to make successes of themselves, which would erode the control the oligarchy has over the rest of the population. So, the status quo has to stay in place. The Dutch disease must continue to fester. Of course, this creates an obvious issue, as Warburg explains. He notes that Russia doesn't have innovative brands that sell products to the rest of the world. The same goes for many other Russian industries.
And it basically means that when you remove the energy sector, as has now happened, the Russian economy as a whole can quickly crumble like a house of cards.
And that leads nicely into the next point. Russia's Dutch disease runs even deeper than already discussed. As noted earlier, much of Russia's federal budget is reliant on the country's energy sector. Guess where a lot of the money from that budget is going right now? The Russian arms industry, of course. That sector represents one of the very few growth industries that Russia has right now, and it's been receiving a ton of funding that can only come thanks to oil and gas revenue. So much funding, in fact, that Warburg says that this one industry has caused massive wage hikes across Russia, which is in turn leading to labor shortages across other sectors. Think back to the example of what happened with the Netherlands earlier in the video. It showed that a single surging industry can lead to potential employees abandoning other sectors to make as much as they can from that other industry. Right now, weapons production is that surging industry in Russia, albeit one that's only made possible by Russia's energy sector, and other Russian industries are starting to feel the pinch. That means Russia's Dutch disease doesn't just affect the country on a national level, it's hurting Russia on the local level too. BBC Monitoring highlighted this problem in February when it reported on Russia having enjoyed a 4.6% year-on-year increase in industrial output in 2024. That growth was fueled by sectors including metal fabrication, electronics, and machinery and equipment repair, all of which are intrinsically linked to the war economy Putin has created in Russia. But the impact was being felt elsewhere. BBC Monitoring said that 13% of Russia's businesses claimed to have a shortage of working capital during the first quarter of 2024. That had risen to 25% by the end of the year. Manufacturing was only growing because of the war industry too. The outlet quotes Spidel Finance, which says, according to preliminary estimates, of the 18.3 percentage points of manufacturing growth over 3 years, more than 20 percentage points are accounted for by the military-industrial complex factor through intersectoral linkages. It's impossible to make precise estimates, which means the civilian sector is predominantly in the negative. That was in 2024. The situation is only getting worse in 2025. Why would the average Russian want to work anywhere other than a war-related industry when the war is paying so well? In the short term, these kinds of local-level issues don't immediately rear their heads. People getting paid more due to switching to roles in Russia's military-industrial complex can then spend more at the local businesses, such as restaurants and shops, than they would have in the past. That assumes any of those local businesses survive when they can't compete with the wages being offered elsewhere. But this is all short-term, as Warburg points out.
It will obviously end when the war ends and these companies go out of business, and these local economies will be completely robbed of all of this income, but all of the traditional employers will already be out of business, and that will be absolutely devastating.
It's the small military towns that will struggle the most, with a tale that's almost as old as the industry itself. When entire communities are built around just one industry, those communities collapse when that industry goes under. Just look at the US Rust Belt for proof. Assuming you exclude New York City, America's Rust Belt was home to a third of the country's population in 1950, according to Forbes. Steel, coal, and vehicles were the main products produced across this belt. But as time went on, the manufacturing of steel and vehicles was outsourced to other countries. Coal, on the other hand, became a less desirable product as oil, gas, and eventually clean energy solutions took over. By 2000, the population of the Rust Belt accounted for a quarter of America's total population, rather than a third. People were jumping ship to other states and other industries because the work in traditional Rust Belt sectors had dried up. Entire communities were destroyed as a result. And the same thing is going to happen when Russia's wartime economy ends. Only Russia, as an oligarchy, won't be providing as many options to people afterward. Again, it's the oligarchy versus democracy argument. Innovations elsewhere in the US at least allowed people who had previously lived and worked in the Rust Belt to chase opportunity elsewhere. In Russia, the only opportunities that exist are those provided by the oligarchy. So what Russia is experiencing is a triple dose of the Dutch disease. Its energy sector, upon which the entire house of cards stands, is crumbling. If and when that sector collapses, Russians who are already struggling to travel and trade within their own country will be stranded, destroying many businesses. And with the combined collapse of the energy sector and the end of the Ukraine war, Russia's wartime economy disappears and entire local communities will be ruined. All of this is unfolding in real time to the point where Russia's collapse has already begun. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos discussing how Russia's domestic strife may lead to the end of the country.